What started as a simple investigation of a ritual found on the dark web turned into a nightmare. Imagine everything you thought was just tricks and lies materializing in a macabre and sinister way right in front of you. Stay until the end and find out what happened to me. I am Maria, a paranormal investigator. Despite my profession, I am completely skeptical about the supernatural. Since I was a child, I loved hearing ghost stories and inexplicable events, believing there was something beyond the visible world. However, as I grew up and nothing supernatural manifested in my life, I began to question these beliefs. My childhood interest turned into skepticism, driven by a desire to find rational explanations for the unknown. This led me to study science and logic, solidifying my disbelief. Over time, I decided to create a YouTube channel. My idea was to perform rituals to demonstrate that none of it existed. With charismatic videos and sharp humor, my channel started gaining popularity. Determined, I faced the unknown and often put myself in unusual situations. Each video is a new adventure, taking my audience to dark and mysterious places to prove that there is nothing there but made-up stories. My motivation is clear: to debunk supernatural rituals and prove that in the end, they are just tricks and legends. I fully immerse myself in the rituals, follow each step, and document everything for my audience to see the truth with their own eyes. This commitment to the truth and passion for exposing frauds have made me a reference in the paranormal world, even though I am an inveterate skeptic. Lucas, my cameraman and longtime friend, is curious and has always been by my side, even in the scariest situations. He has his insecurities and sometimes hesitates when things start to get really strange. However, his loyalty makes him an essential partner in our content production. We have worked together for years, creating a strong bond between us. We have had our tensions and disagreements, especially when Lucas feels I'm going too far in the investigations. We were out of ideas for a new video, so we decided to explore dark web forums. The dark web is a dark place, full of grotesque and disturbing content. Browsing must be done with extreme caution, and I never recommend anyone without experience try to access these places. Lucas and I settled in front of the computer, the screen light illuminating our faces as we delved deeper and deeper. We had spent hours rummaging through topics without finding anything really interesting until we came across a discussion about the Hell's Door ritual. The reports about the ritual were intriguing. Some people claimed that when they performed it, sinister things happened. There were descriptions of grotesque figures, unexplained disappearances, and events that defied any logical explanation. The details were eerily specific, which immediately piqued my curiosity. There were grainy videos showing shadows moving on their own, and photos of strange symbols drawn around old doors. With each account read, my skepticism was challenged. Lucas, beside me, seemed equally intrigued, and I read aloud each detail, trying to understand how we could debunk it. The Hell's Door ritual consisted of a set of specific steps. First, it had to be performed on the 12th floor of an abandoned building. Then, draw symbols around the door with red chalk and use a black candle to light the environment. The ritual included invocations to be recited and, finally, you should cross the door 12 times. On the 12th time, according to the reports, the door would become a portal to another dimension. The details of the ritual were meticulous, each step carefully described. There were also accounts of people who, after performing the ritual, did not return, adding to the mystery and tension around this practice. My initial reaction was skepticism, as always. However, there was something different about this ritual. Maybe it was the specificity of the reports or the complexity of the ritual itself, but I knew it would be great content for our channel. Lucas, this could be a great viral video. Already thinking about the possible millions of views. Imagine our followers' reaction when we debunk this, I said, already starting to plan the video in my head. The decision was made quickly. We would perform the ritual. The idea of testing something with so many visual and detailed reports seemed irresistible to our audience. As soon as I finished reading the report, I already knew where this ritual could be performed. There is a building in my city that was condemned and never finished due to structural failures. I have even made some videos there, as there are several supernatural reports associated with the place. Some crimes were committed there, heavy stuff that I prefer not to reveal here, but you can imagine the type of situations that occurred. This would be the perfect place to perform the ritual since the building is isolated, increasing the adventure even more. Lucas and I would have to break into the building to get access to the 12th floor. The fact that we had to enter illegally only added to the challenge and suspense. We planned everything carefully, from the equipment we would take to how we would document each step of the ritual. The preparations started with buying the necessary items for the ritual. First, we went to an esoteric shop to buy a black candle, which according to the instructions was essential to light the room during the ritual. Next, we bought coarse salt, which would be used to create a protective circle around the door. We also acquired a ritualistic knife with a thin blade and intricate details on the handle. This knife was not just a tool, but a symbol of power and sacrifice. While gathering the items, I noticed that Lucas was particularly quiet. He always had a more cautious behavior, but this time he seemed especially uneasy. "Maria, do you really think this is a good idea?" he asked, hesitant. "I feel a stranger and more uncomfortable feeling than usual." I responded with my typical confident tone. "Lucas, stop being a coward. How many times have we done this? It's just another urban legend, and by the way, we will surely have a great video." He nodded and agreed, somewhat reluctantly. "Okay," he murmured, knowing the show had to go on. The night was calm when we prepared to head to the abandoned building. A light breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, creating an environment that contrasted with the moment. Lucas and I put our backpacks on our shoulders, full of equipment, and walked silently to the car. The trip to the building was quick and uneventful, with time for some jokes. When we arrived at the building, the site was exactly as I remembered. The colossal structure rose against the night sky, its broken windows looking like empty and sad eyes. The building was surrounded by a wooden fence, which was not difficult to cross due to its fragility. There was also a wire fence that we cut an opening in with pliers to enter. The sound of metal being cut and glass shattering under our feet echoed through the place, each noise amplifying our nervousness. If the police caught us, trespassing would be a big problem, and we would surely be arrested. The air was cold and heavy, with a strong smell of mold. We entered carefully, each step seeming like a challenge. We were ready for anything, but hoping not to find anyone there. The interior of the building was even more desolate. Graffitied walls, garbage scattered on the floor. Some broken furniture completed the landscape of abandonment. The smell of decay was penetrating, mixing with the mouldy air and creating an unpleasant sensation. The atmosphere was dense, almost tangible, making each breath feel like an effort. The fear of encountering someone there, perhaps a homeless person or a vandal, added an extra level of tension to our mission. We reached the 12th floor a few minutes before midnight after an exhausting climb. The elevator, of course, was out of the question, so we had to use the stairs. Carrying heavy backpacks, each step seemed a bigger challenge than the previous one. The air became denser and harder to breathe as we climbed, and the feeling of strangeness increased with each floor. Each level we passed seemed to pull us deeper into the darkness, with strange sounds and shadows that seemed to move at the edges of our vision. When we finally reached our destination, we paused for a moment to catch our breath and mentally prepare. Lucas, panting, began to unpack the equipment and set it up. When it struck midnight, we started preparing the place. First, we lit the black candle, its flame flickering in the cold, heavy air of the building. The dim light illuminated the room, casting shadows on the graffitied walls. Next, we began drawing the symbols around the door with red chalk. Each stroke was meticulously replicated according to the reports, creating an intricate and meaningful pattern. The candlelight projected distorted figures on the walls. The room was immersed in a heavy silence, broken only by the distant echo of dripping water and the sound of our cautious steps. After drawing the symbols, I traced a semicircle of salt as a barrier in front of the door. This, according to the ritual, was to keep what was inside from getting out. Each grain seemed like a fragile barrier against the unknown. Lucas, with the camera in hand, nervously filmed each step, capturing the dark environment and the details of the ritual. I grabbed the ritual knife and lightly cut the palm of my hand, letting the blood drip onto the black candle. The smell of blood mingled with the already heavy atmosphere, and I began reciting the invocations, my voice echoing off the empty walls. Lucas nervously filmed everything, his camera capturing every detail. The tension increased with each word spoken. Each drop of blood seemed to intensify the atmosphere around us. The ritual was in progress. We then began the final part of the ritual, holding the doorknob with the cut hand, staining it with blood, and entering and exiting the door 12 times. With each entry, the environment seemed to change subtly. Initially, it was just a feeling of discomfort. But as we continued, everything started to get stranger. The air became colder and heavier, and a strange feeling of being watched took over me. Lucas was also visibly shaken, but continued filming, capturing every moment with precision. With each passage, the door seemed to pulse with a strange, almost alive energy. When we exited the door for the 12th time, the candle went out, and everything went completely dark. We were illuminated only by the night vision of the camera and the sinister red pulsing of the door. The sensation was surreal, as if reality had distorted around us. The skepticism I always maintained began to waver. I looked at Lucas, trying to understand if this was some kind of trick of his. "Lucas, did you do this?" I asked, my voice betraying my uncertainty. But Lucas was as confused as I was, shaking his head in denial. Lucas looked at the door and then at me. "Maria, what is happening? I think we should gather our things and leave. We have seen too much. Maybe this is a real ritual," he said, his voice trembling. But I knew we couldn't stop now. I never believed in any of this. It had to be some kind of trick, even if it didn't make any sense. I was very curious about what we might find behind the door, but at the same time, I confess I was scared. But in the name of content, I said, "We need to continue, Lucas. We have to see what's behind that door," I insisted. Lucas, although frightened, agreed. I think he was fearing for my safety and offered to go ahead and make the images. As soon as Lucas entered through the door, it abruptly closed before I could follow him. The sound of the door slamming echoed down the hallway, leaving me in terrifying silence. "Lucas!" I shouted, running to the door and trying to turn the doorknob with all my strength. On the other side, I heard his desperate cries for help. "Maria, help me. There is something in here. I don't know what it is." He tried to open the door from the inside but couldn't. "I'm trying, Lucas. Hold on," I shouted back, shaking the doorknob forcefully. "They are pulling me. Maria, please hurry." The panic in his voice was palpable and increased my despair. It seemed that the door was locked. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Finally, with supreme effort, I managed to open the door, and a wave of cold and darkness enveloped me as I crossed to the other side. The environment on the other side was a dark nightmare from another dimension. Initially, it looked like the abandoned building, but soon transformed into something much more disturbing. The hallways were long and dark, with doors lined on both sides. Doors I had no idea where they led and wasn't too keen to find out. The environment carried a sense of urgency. I wanted to go back, but I couldn't do that without Lucas. The flashlight trembled in my hands, casting beams of light that did little to dispel the darkness. I could barely see a few meters ahead, and panic began to take hold of me. In the distance, I could hear Lucas's desperate and anguished screams. "Maria, help me! Where are you?" he shouted, but the echoes made it seem like his voice came from all directions. The shock of being in such a sinister and unknown place paralyzed me momentarily. I had never believed in any of this, and now I was facing something that defied all my logic and skepticism. Forcing myself to move forward, I began opening door after door, each one taking me deeper into the dark maze. Lucas's screams grew more distant with each second, until they finally ceased, plunging the environment into an eerie silence that made my heart beat even faster. A paralyzing fear took hold of me as I wondered if Lucas had died. The idea was unbearable, but I couldn't shake it. I started opening doors frantically, each one leading to other equally dark and deformed hallways. The walls were dirty, with dark stains and moss, and the smell of mold was suffocating. Each hallway was a distorted and hellish version of the previous one, making me feel like I was trapped in an endless back room. My skepticism was challenged with every step as I struggled to understand what was happening. "This can't be happening," I murmured to myself, trying to stay calm. But the reality around me defied all the logic I knew. As I advanced, the environment became increasingly oppressive. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the smell of mold intensified, making it hard to breathe. My mind was a whirlwind of confused thoughts. Is this all real? What if Lucas is really dead? I didn't want to believe it, but the absence of his screams left a terrifying void. I felt lost and powerless, as if I were in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Continuing the search, I opened a door that led me to an even darker and narrower hallway. The flashlight trembled in my hands. The silence was disturbing, broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing in the hallway. Suddenly, I heard a distant noise, a sound that resembled a moan. I followed the sound, hoping to find Lucas. Finally, I saw a figure moving in the darkness. Panic gripped me, but for a moment, hope glowed in my chest. "Lucas?" I murmured, advancing slowly. However, as I got closer, I realized it wasn't Lucas. The figure was something horrible, something I could barely describe. It was crouched, devouring something on the ground. My heart nearly stopped when the flashlight revealed a scene of horror. The creature was eating someone. I was completely horrified and in shock, not knowing if the victim was Lucas. The fear that it could be him froze me in place. Without making a sound, I began to back away slowly. As soon as I turned to find another door, the strange figure stood up and started chasing me. It looked like a demon, something agonizing and threatening. I ran desperately, crashing into walls and tripping over debris, opening doors at random. Every time I thought I had lost the creature, it appeared again, closer and more threatening. Panic blinded me, but adrenaline kept me moving. After several desperate attempts to escape, I finally found a door that seemed different. I crossed it and quickly closed it behind me. I took a deep breath, trying to listen for any signs of the creature. The silence returned, but the fear remained. I looked around and realized I was lost, with no idea where I was, where Lucas could be, or how to get out of there. I was in a state of complete despair, and the only thing that came to mind was the need to survive. I decided that I needed to get out of there and seek help, even if it meant leaving Lucas behind temporarily. I waited a while longer in total silence to see if I could hear anything that might be that demonic monster. But what prevailed was the silence and the stench of the place. I had a strong desire to cry. The despair completely overtook me. Slowly, I continued cautiously down the corridor behind the door. Every shadow seemed like a threat, and every sound a warning of imminent danger. After wandering for a while in the place where the darkest and most bizarre thoughts crossed my mind, and traversing endless doors and sinister corridors, with fear dominating me, finally, in the distance, I saw that door pulsing in red. I ran towards it with all my strength, my only hope of escaping this nightmare. I crossed the door, and suddenly, the environment returned to what I knew. I was back in the abandoned building. The silence was deafening, and Lucas was nowhere to be found. I shouted his name, but there was no response. I looked around frantically, trying to find any sign of him. Nothing. Despair completely overtook me. I needed to seek help. I left all our equipment behind and ran out of the building, descending the stairs so quickly that I almost tripped several times. My heart was pounding and my lungs burned from lack of air. Each step echoed ominously in the empty hallways. Finally, I reached the ground floor and crossed the broken window through which we had entered. When I finally got outside, I saw our car in the distance. I ran towards it, but when I got close, I realized I was without the keys. They had stayed in the backpack with the equipment upstairs. The realization hit me like a punch, and the feeling of helplessness almost brought me to my knees. Without thinking much, I started running again, trying to find help. The streets were deserted and silent, increasing the sense of isolation and despair. My feet pounded heavily on the asphalt as tears of frustration and fear streamed down my face. As I ran through the deserted streets, my legs began to weaken. I was so focused on escaping that I didn't see a rock in my path. I tripped, fell, and hit my head hard on the sidewalk. Everything went black. The impact was so sudden that I didn't have time to process what was happening. The last thing I felt was the intense pain in my head and the taste of blood in my mouth before losing consciousness. I woke up on the ground. It was still night and everything was dark, as if at most an hour had passed. My head hurt intensely, and it took me a few moments to get my bearings. I looked at my watch and saw that it read 0001. This doesn't make sense, I thought, confused. I checked my cell phone, and to my astonishment, it also read 0001. It was as if everything I had experienced hadn't happened, as if time had frozen. But the pain in my head and the scratches on my body were real. As I tried to process what was happening, my mind raced with all the possibilities. I couldn't simply ignore what I had seen and experienced. I needed to find Lucas, no matter the cost. With the hope that perhaps I had hallucinated and that Lucas might be waiting for me, I returned to the building. Everything that had happened made no sense. Maybe I had had an accident and imagined everything, but I needed to check. Upon re-entering the building, everything seemed normal and dirty as before. The signs that I had passed through were still there, like the open fence and the car. I quickly climbed the stairs, each step echoing through the empty corridor, the feeling of fatigue and headache bothering me. After many flights of stairs, I reached the 12th floor, and I saw that the door was still pulsing with that sinister red light, chilling my body. It wasn't just a hallucination. Then I heard Lucas's screams again, clearly coming from behind the door. "Maria, help me!" His voice was full of despair and pain. I hesitated, but I knew I had to cross again, even if it meant facing the same horrors. I turned the doorknob and entered. The same intense cold enveloped me, and the darkness seemed to swallow me. I was back in that dark nightmare of another dimension. As I advanced, I heard Lucas's voice echoing through the dark and oppressive corridors. The sound seemed distorted, as if it were coming from all sides. "Maria, help me!" His voice sounded desperate and full of pain. I continued advancing, each step loaded with fear and uncertainty. Finally, I saw a door where the screams seemed to come more clearly. My heart was pounding as I approached, and with trembling hands I turned the doorknob and opened the door. As soon as the door opened, I was confronted with the sight of the demon. It was there, with its distorted and malevolent features, and its eyes glowing with an intense red light. Shock and terror instantly took over me. The creature began to echo Lucas's screams in its voice, as if mocking me. "Maria, help me!" The demon's words, mixed with Lucas's voice, were a cruel taunt. Panic completely overtook me. The creature advanced quickly, and I knew I couldn't escape this time. Adrenaline pushed me to fight, but my efforts were futile against its overwhelming strength. I felt its claws dig into me, and the pain was excruciating. I fought with all my might, but it was like facing an implacable and inhuman force. The last thing I saw were the demon's glowing eyes, full of malice and triumph, before everything went black. The sensation of being torn from reality was overwhelming, and the darkness consumed my mind as Lucas's screams mixed with my own.